Crisp boxes are some of our most popular projects in the magazine, so it's always a little bit of a challenge trying to come up with something that's new, but I think you've done it here.
I think we have. These boxes are based on Japanese puzzle boxes, and I have one here. Now, if you'll notice, no hardware, no hinges, no hasp, just a box. But it requires 5 moves to open up. And Japanese puzzle boxes are fascinating. They can require anywhere from 3 to well over 100 moves. So let me show you how this one opens up. First, I'm going to slide this key over. I'll push this end down. I'm going to slide the lid of the box over that end. Come to the other end, slide that end down, and now I can open the box and reveal the contents inside.
I like the double discovery here of trying to figure out how the box opens up and then to figure out what's inside. But I think as a woodworker, there's also the engineering part of it of how am I going to make this?
Absolutely, and that's half the fun of this project. The project itself is based on a lot of intricate joints which have to move against each other. And so to do that, we've used a router table. And this is a small router table which will appear in a future episode of the Woodsmith shop. And I've used it because it gets my parts up to a convenient height, and it's just a size that really fits and complements the size of this project. We're going to use several different bits to make the joinery of the box. Primarily, I'm going to use a 1/8 inch double flute carbide bit because all of our joinery is based on a 1/8 inch increment.
Now the setups of the router table are really what's important here.
Yeah, and that's what you're going to learn when you build these boxes, how to accurately, repeatedly set up a router table. I have found the best way to do that is to use setup blocks. I have a set here, and they come in different thicknesses from a 1/16 to 1/2 inch thick. And so what I can do for an 1/8 inch distance between the router bit and the fence is take an 1/8 inch setup block and slide it between the fence and the bit. And so instead of having to squint and look at a ruler and try and nudge things back and forth, it's a go, no-go gauge. When I get it behind that bit, it's dead on 1/8 inch.
And you can repeat that setting pretty easily.
Absolutely, and that's what makes this project go smoothly, is that repeatability.
And that repeatability, consistency extends to our project parts, right?
Yes. One of the things that's important is that we thickness all of our material to an exact 3/8 inch because our joinery is based on a 1/8 inch router bit.
Okay. So now the big time-consuming part of this project is actually the setup, right?
It is. It does take a little bit of time to set it up, and that's why you should think, instead of making one puzzle box, make 6, make 8. They're great gifts, and you'll have a lot of fun giving them away.
Okay. Well, so we've talked about the parts that we need and how we're going to set up the router table. I think it's time for you to get started on actually walking through this process.
I think so. Most of the action in building the puzzle box is going to take place here at the router table. Now, I went ahead and pre-cut parts. I've got 2 parts for the top, 2 sides, 2 ends, and 2 dividers. The first part that I'm going to start with is going to be the top and the bottom. And the first step in that will be to route a groove along the 2 long edges of both the top and the bottom, and then route a groove along the end of what will be the top. I already have my router table set up. I have an 1/8 inch bit in place. It's a 1/4 inch above the work surface and an 1/8 inch in front of the fence. Now I'm using Padauk, which is a lovely wood, but it's a little nasty. So I'm going to put a respirator on, my earmuffs, and start routing. Place the part against the fence firmly, pushing down against the router table, and with a smooth action, push the part through the router bit. When routing the edges of the top and the bottom, it's important that the same face always register against the fence. Don't flip it as you move from one groove to the other. After routing the 2 long grooves on both the top and the bottom, choose what will be the top and route a groove on the end of the top. Once again, make sure that you're registering the same face against the fence. The next step in making the top and the bottom is to remove a little bit of the tongue of both the top and the bottom and on the end of the top. Now we're going to be removing 1/8 inch of material, and that's a bit of a heavy cut for a 1/8 inch router bit. So I'll do it in 2 passes. I've moved my fence forward so that approximately 1/16 inch of the router bit is exposed. Holding the part firmly against the router table, push it through the router bit in a slow, measured fashion. Once through, spin your piece around and do the other side. For the top, do both sides, and then finish by routing the end. Once we've completed our first pass, readjust the fence so that a full 1/8 inch of the router bit is exposed, and then repeat the process once again. The last step in making the top is going to be able to cut a rabbet 7/16 of an inch long, 1/4 inch deep, on the unused end of the top. I'm going to do this by making a series of light cuts, advancing the router fence a little bit each time.
Chris, I think we're going to fast forward in time here a little bit because this is the box that you're working on right now. But I wanted to stop and talk a little bit about the fit of the parts, because when we're working on this kind of box, there's a difference between plan numbers and actual numbers.
There is. A lot of projects, we start with a basic set of dimensions, but before long, we start building to the project itself. Sure. And that's very much the case here. We're going to be doing a lot of test parts to make sure that we've got just the right fit as we proceed.
Yeah, and we're not looking at joints like you normally would in woodworking, where it's parts that need to go together and then get glued for all time. These parts need to move.
They do need to move. Now, take this end, for example. I want a fit that offers a little bit of resistance, but still slides easily. What we don't want is a joint that's tight, so that we have a seasonal piece of furniture here that locks solid and can only be used in the middle of winter when things are bone dry. We want things to be able to move. Now, as we work, we can check our test parts. We also may find that we need to open things up a little bit. So we might want to sand some edges, since they can tend to grab a little bit. Fold some sandpaper over, ease the grooves a little bit. You may find that emery boards or a small file will work well to open those up too.
Okay, so I think it helps to be able to see how these parts go together and see what kind of sliding fit we're shooting for as we're building the project. So let's get back to it.
We've moved on to the sides, and these are busy parts. There's a lot going on with them. We're going to route in grooves, rabbets, through dados, and stop dados. Well, we're going to start with the grooves and with the rabbets. So I've got my router bit set 1/8 of an inch above the table. The fence is 1/4 inch back, and I'll start with the grooves, and then we'll move on to the rabbets. Now we're going to route the grooves on the inside of each side piece on the top and bottom edge. When we're done with that, we'll move on and rabbet the edges. Now, I would recommend that you cut the rabbets in 2 passes, and that'll give you a cleaner cut with less chipping. The next step in making our sides is to cut through dados on each end of the side. Our bed is set 1/8 of an inch above the surface of the router table, and the fence is 1/8 of an inch back. Now, one thing I want to point out is that we're going to be cutting a fairly narrow strip of wood between the rabbet and the groove that we just cut. And so we need to go very slow and very carefully so that we don't break off the small amount of wood that will be left. Well, we're almost done with our sides. The last step we need to do is to cut 2 stopped dados, 1 on each end of our side. The stopped dados are 2 1/4 inches long, and they start from the bottom and extend up to this pencil mark here. Now, what's a challenge on the router table is when we make a stop dado is that we can't really see where the bit is in relation to our marks. So what we need to do is to create some reference marks on our fence so that we know how far to push this piece in and therefore when to stop. Now, to create the first reference mark, I'm going to lay my ruler directly on top of the router bit. I'm going to flush it out on the end near me. I know that my router needs to go 2 1/4 inches into the wood, and so I'm going to make a reference mark at 2 1/4 inches. And so when I flip this part over, I'm going to go until I hit that mark, and I'll stop, and I'll lift the part off the router bit. To do the other stopped dado, it gets a little more challenging because we need to actually drop the part down on top of the router bit and then push it through. And so we need a different mark. We need to know when to start a piece. To lay that out, I'm going to take my ruler and I'm going to place it against the router bit. And I know that there's 3/4 of an inch left from the top of that stopped dado to the top of my side. And so at 3/4 of an inch, I'm going to place another reference mark. And so when I start to cut this stopped dado, I'm going to drop my part on top of the router bit and at the point of that reference, and then push the piece through. With our reference marks laid out, we're ready to begin routing the stopped dados of our side piece. I will begin by pushing the piece through the router and stopping at our furthest mark. Lifting the piece off, I'll then rotate it around. Only this time, I'm going to drop my side down on top of the router, referencing to the second mark. And now I'll push the side through. The next step in the construction of the puzzle box is to make the 2 dividers. Now, each divider will have a tenon on either end, and then one of the dividers will have an L-shaped recess cut into its face, and that recess accepts a small wooden key that's part of the mechanism for the puzzle box. Now, on the router table, I have an 1/8 inch bit installed. It's an 1/8 inch prior to the surface and an 1/8 inch away from the fence. And with that, I'm ready to cut some tenons. To create the tenons, I'll push the divider through the router bit, flip it over, and cut the other side. With the tenon made, we now need to cut a 3/8 inch shoulder on one end of each tenon. So that means holding the part upright. Now, to help me keep it in control, I'm going to use a softwood block to back up my divider. And with that in place, I'll carefully push the divider through the router bit. It's also a good idea to make this cut in 2 passes. I'm going to remove most of the waste in the lock recess using a 1/4 inch Forstner bit in the drill press. Afterwards, I'll use a chisel and clean things up. Well, we're in the home stretch now. We just have 2 ends to make. Most of the work in constructing these ends is going to take place here at the router table. We'll need to cut some rabbets and some grooves, work you're already familiar with. The first step in making the ends is to route all 4 edges of each piece. Once I'm done with that, I'm going to reset the fence and I'm going to route each end of the end pieces. With that done, I need to create 2 fairly deep rabbets in the bottom of each of the ends. So I'm going to move my fence a little bit each time and make sure I sneak up on the desired depth of the rabbet. With that done, I'll run each piece through on end, creating the tongue that's going to hold the end pieces to the sides. Our last step is to cut a shallow groove on the top of what will be the back of the box, and that will engage the sliding top. I have a completed puzzle box here, and as you can see, there's a sliding dovetailed key on this end. So our next chore at the router table is to cut a dovetail channel across the face of this end piece. Now to do that, I've installed a 14-degree, 1/2 inch wide dovetail bit. And so with 2 successive passes, I'm going to create a 3/4 inch wide dovetail channel across the face of our end piece. Well, here's where we are with the lock end of our puzzle box. As you can see, I've cut in a 3/8 inch wide slot into the dovetail channel, and through that slot will be a small wooden key. Our next step is to create the slide, which will go into the dovetail channel. Now to do that, I've prepared a piece of 1/8 by 7/8 inch stock. Now one thing we need to keep in mind when doing that is we'd like the grain of our stock here to match the grain of the end. And that's going to make the slide a little more secretive, and that's part of the fun of the puzzle box. The first step in creating this slide is that I've put a 14-degree dovetail bit in my router, and I've attached my stock with a piece of double-sided tape to a carrier board, and that just makes it easier to handle. I'm going to run it past the router bit and establish a 14-degree slope on one side. I'm then going to pull my stock off, reattach it, and cut the other side. Very carefully and in small steps, I'm going to work towards a perfect fit of the slide into the dovetail channel. This is the dovetail slide that we just finished making. Our next job is to cut a small pocket on the back of the slide, and that pocket acts as a mortise for the key, which will be on a part of our puzzle box. Now to locate and make that pocket, I have a 1/4 inch bit in the router table. I've also made 2 marks on my blank. This is an oversized piece, so these marks represent the final size of the dovetailed slide. You'll also see I have a starting mark and a stopping mark on my fence. So what I will do is take my slide, drop it down on the bit, aligning these 2 marks, move it until my rear mark and this mark align, and then lift it off. And that will complete my pocket. Well, we're almost done building our puzzle boxes. It's time to glue parts together. Now, one thing I want to point out, I've gone ahead and made and glued in a little key into this lock-in assembly. And it has to go in before the 2 come together. Now, with that done, I need to say a little warning here. If you're one of those people that like to see the glue squeeze out of the joints when you glue things together, well, you need to mend your ways, because we've got moving parts here, and we can't have any glue squeeze out. So what I'm going to use to be a little more careful with the glue is one of these glue syringes. That way I can place it very accurately. Now the first thing we're going to do is glue the bottom onto the sides and put in our 2 dividers. So I'm going to go ahead, take my glue syringe, and put just a small amount of glue in these stop dados, a little bit down in the long groove, and then I'm going to put a small amount of glue in the long groove in the bottom. With that, I'm going to place my bottom into the side, push that down firmly. Now I'm going to take my first divider, put it in place, and now my second divider with the recess for the lock facing outward, and put that in place. With that done, our next step is to take the lock assembly and wiggle that into position. Because we can't put it in later, we have to put it in now. So with these parts in place, I'm going to take my other side, and I'm going to go ahead and put a little glue in those dados. A little bit of glue into this long groove. Once again, glue in the long groove at the bottom. And with that, I'm ready to bring things together. There's a couple parts that all come together at once, and it takes a little wiggling. I'm going to turn it around where I can see and try and nurse things into position here. And there we go. Now our other end and the top, those can stay off for now. So with everything glued up, I'm going to go ahead and put 2 clamps on. Draw the sides firmly against the dividers and draw the sides firmly against the bottom. And with those 2 on, I want to check, make sure everything fits well. Looks like it does. And with that, I'm going to walk away and let the glue dry.
The router table's put away, the project is all glued up, and the box works just right. Now it's time to talk about some finish.
It is. The finish that I like to use is an oil finish that penetrates the wood. You can finish the interior of the box if you'd like, but what I'd recommend is you be a little bit careful not to put too much finish on. And what I found worked well was to use a compressor and just to blow out any of the excess oil. What we don't want is any finish that will gum up the different moving parts.
Because we still want it to work well. So what I like about the oil finish is what it does to the color of the wood. I mean, in other projects, it really brings out the figure and the color. And you can see that in this example here, because both of these 2 boxes were made from the same Paduke, but you can definitely tell which one has an oil finish on it.
Yeah, the oil really brings out a richness to these exotic woods. Now, if you like a little heavier finish, you can always pad on a few more coats of the oil on the outside only.
Okay. What about any other kind of finish options?
Well, one great finish option is wax. Wax is simple to apply, it brings out a rich grain, and it'll help lubricate all the joints.
And I think paste wax is often overlooked as a finish option all on its own, but I really like how it feels too, because this project is going to get used a lot.
Well, that's what we hope.
Okay. If you'd like free step-by-step plans to build your own set of puzzle boxes, they're at our website, woodsmithshop.com. And thanks, Chris, for showing us how it works.
You're welcome.
When working in a small shop, you have to get creative with your power tool footprint. Adam Peterson of Sioux Falls, South Dakota suggested we turn our foldable bench into a portable router table. All you need is a simple top and a fence, and you're ready to get started. The top has a couple of wide cleats. With a couple turns of the crank, you clamp it in place. We also included a couple holes, that way you can throw it on the wall when you're not using it. So whether you're working in a small shop or need it for on the go, you have an easy to move router solution.
The boxes Chris made in today's episode were both made out of Paduke, but you can give your own puzzle boxes a great look just by changing up the material. Here are a few of the possibilities. We have one from Red Heart, another made in mahogany, this one's made from lacewood, and this final one in Wenge. If you're ready to get started, free plans for these boxes, as well as other great projects, are at our website, woodsmithshop.com. There, you can unlock your own woodworking puzzle.